are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards. Hello, and welcome to this April 16th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards, and I have a couple of guests today who have been here before. I previously talked to them about topics like empathy and swim lessons, so today's topic is very different.
This ain't Texas. Ain't no hold'em.
We're going to talk about country music, what defines genres and audiences, and the musical gatekeepers who think they get to decide who defines those genres and audiences. And by the way, my country-sounding theme song is called Real Life and was written and performed for this program by Bombay Beach Revival. So today, my guests are Lynne Childress, who is a playwright, author, teaching artist, singer, and a director from Annapolis, Maryland, and Darrin Evans, who is the director of the North Carolina Virtual Learning Community and Professional Development Center. Lynne and Darrin, welcome to the Hoedown.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So the occasion for this episode was sparked by Beyoncé's new country album, Cowboy Carter, and the social media post that I wrote about it. In that post, I said, "This album is a musical history lesson. It's a trail ride through the rough terrain of the Black American experience. It recalls the spirituals of the enslaved, the work rhythms of sharecroppers, and the dignity of women who held the fractured pieces together. Having Rhiannon Giddens on the banjo and hearing the approving voices of Dolly and Willie added gravitas. The dissenters who say Beyoncé should stay in her lane need this history lesson. Without those outlets for Black labor and faith, there would be no country roads to travel." And after I posted that, it generated enough conversation that I thought it would make an interesting episode. So here we are right now. So when formerly enslaved men in the 19th century left the plantations to try to tame animals in Western lands, it was said that they, quote, went up the trail. Today, we're going down the rabbit trail of American music, especially as it relates to Black people and country music. Now, most people don't know that banjos came to America from West Africa. Without this musical outlet to the dehumanizing conditions that faced African Americans, you don't get Negro spirituals, which evolved into folk music, the blues, then country music, and beyond. So this is a wide-ranging issue. So I'm going to try to wrangle this as close to the center as I can keep it. This episode is part history, part music appreciation, and part self-identification. I'm going to identify myself after I allow my guests to do that. All three of us are Black, but that's what we are. It's not necessarily who we are, as other people might assume us to be.
I am a Black Gen X woman. That's who I identify myself as, and whatever that means to anybody. I'll tell them, and or they'll figure it out what that means. But I am like this album, unapologetically Black.
All right, Darrin, what about you?
As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm a Black Southerner from rural North Carolina. And we have our own sort of history and traditions. But that's kind of how I would describe myself. Okay. And maybe say I was a techie because I kind of work in technology.
And in our first episode, I said if North Carolina barbecue sauce could talk, it would probably sound like you. So
probably so.
So as for me, I wear cowboy hats often. And if you're listening to this podcast, you can't see, but I'm wearing a cowboy hat now. And I have for as long as I can remember. So this isn't anything new. So hats are a big part of who I am. So my dad grew up on a farm and spent his early adulthood getting paid to train horses. He used to play country music on the car radio wherever he went. So I had a very early exposure to country music. And my mom's brothers were rodeo bull riders. My first Texas ancestor, Isaac Blayton, was a blacksmith and a cowboy. So I am literally a card-carrying member of the Sons of the Republic of Texas. my roots in country are not a novelty. So the first time somebody who talks about this album says I'm wearing a cowboy hat because of Beyonce, I'm going to demonstrate my lassoing skills, and I'm not even kidding. And I do know how to lasso. It's been a while since I've had to use that. All right. So 25% of early cowboys were black. A lot of people don't appreciate that. So my family made up a large portion of that early population, in Texas history. So Lynn, I saw that you posted on Facebook that you were listening to the new album and it made you emotional. Why is that?
Very much so. I had heard pieces of it before, and I think I had heard the first song is American Requiem, which is gorgeous. And it made me emotional because it made me think of the blood, sweat, and tears that our ancestors put into this country that's often not recognized. And it just made me feel like I just wanted to go like grab a hunk of land and just like have it in my fingers. And I knew that I was going to be, this was before I had listened to the whole album, which I did last week. I had a 2-hour drive from Pennsylvania and I listened to the whole thing in the car. And I knew from that thing that it was setting off what was going to be very emotional, because again, I just knew that it was, like you said, a connection to and a claiming of our history. And, we too sing America, to quote Langston Hughes. And that's how it made me feel, that I knew I was going to be on a ride.
All right, Darrin, how did it make you feel? I know you didn't say that it made you feel emotional, but I'm curious. Well, first, how did you like the album?
Well, a little bit better than I thought. I guess this is a safe space. I'm part of the Bay Hive. I like Beyonce's voice. I'm not paying $500 to go see her live, but I like to hear her voice. So very similar to Lynn, so I travel for my job. So I was driving across the state to the mountains, and I just kind of listened to it and just went through a couple times, and just sort of absorbed it. And it really was, I kind of relate to what Lynn was saying about a reclaiming. I think we can talk more about that later, but that's one sort of phrase that came up for me.
Okay. So, Darrin, I saw that you posted on X asking Black people to list their favorite country songs of all time. And most people would be surprised that that would even be a thing, that Black people might have a favorite country song. So what yeah, I see Lynn shaking her head. So what is your favorite country tune? And then we'll each share our favorite country songs.
One of my favorite top 10 albums, I have eclectic musical taste, is Guitars Cadillacs by Dwight Yoakam. And that's my favorite country song because it tells a story. And the rumor is it's about his relationship with Sharon Stone when he got to Hollywood. But it's a whole album about heartbreak and breaking up and just being depressed. But ironically, when I listen to it, it makes me feel better. When I'm depressed, I listen to depressing music. So
at least you think, well, at least I don't have it as bad as that guy.
Yeah.
All right, Lynn, what's your favorite country song or album?
Probably it's Wide Open Spaces by the Chicks, formerly of Dixie. And that song kills me and wrecks me. I was on a tour. I'm an actor, and I was doing a tour of a theater show, and had that on rotation. It was the year it came out earlier, but the year that I really got into it was the year I turned 30, and talking about wide open spaces. And that's what I was doing, is going across the country. And I really, what that phrase means, literally and also figuratively. And it was, the beginning of the 2000s. It was pre 9/11, and it just felt very grounding to me and beautiful. I love their voices. I mean, I'm Not Ready to Make Nice, which is sort of like came after the 9/11 thing, is probably one of my other favorites. But and you might ask this question later, but I'll just say it and I'll stop talking, is that though we were raised, I'm Gen X, so I was a child of the 70s and 80s, and country music was on pop stations and on, so it wasn't as fragmented as it is now. We were all into Kenny Rogers. We all knew Elvira by the Oak Ridge Boys. We all knew this, and so
Yeah, that is absolutely the truth. I got to meet the songwriter who wrote Wide Open Spaces. I don't know if you heard that episode, but back in the fall, I had the privilege of being the MC for the songwriters conference, I guess it was called, in Wimberley, Texas. And the woman who wrote that song was there, and she wrote it as a freshman in college. It's funny. She was home for holiday break between semesters, and she was just doodling on a notepad in her bedroom, and she didn't like it, so she threw it in the trash can. And she went back to school the next semester, and it was still in the trash when she left. And her mom was cleaning out her room and saw it and started reading it, and then sent it to her and said, "This is really good. You need to finish this." So she finished the song, and then eventually it got to Natalie Maine's dad, and the chicks recorded it.
Oh.
So great story. So my favorite country song that I told Darren before, it actually start as a country song, was a Billy Joel song, but Garth Brooks made it his song on Shameless, and that was when country sort of had a resurgence in the late 80s. So country was really popular in the late 70s and early 80s, as you said, Lynn, but then it sort of had a resurgence in pop culture in the late 80s. But I love that song. And I wasn't that necessarily a fan of Garth Brooks, but I really liked his version of that song. All right, so let's go on to the next thing. So I do want to say that I was born into an intact family with 2 black parents, but I joke that I grew up in a redneck family. My dad and I fished a lot. We never missed watching the Indianapolis 500, and we went to the rodeo every chance we got. So what are some things that your family did that might not be considered black enough or black at all by some of your critics?
I'll let Lynn start this one.
Well, and again, you don't want this to be a long episode, so I'll give the truncated version of that. But I will say my family was my mom and my dad and my twin sister and I, and we lived overseas for a year and a half. We lived in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in the early 80s because my dad was a contractor in management for the bus system, and we got to travel, and we went to an American school, and we got to see things that really formed us. And I know that when we came back, okay, 11-year-old. So anyway, when we came back to the States, there were people who thought, and we were probably always on that level of probably some people not black enough, even though I knew plenty of black people just like us, but it was people allowing us to define it. Anyway, all that to say, we talk differently and had been exposed to things that people we know, black and white, had not, black and white American had not. And, there were people on our street who stopped talking to my parents because they just assumed that my parents were going to be snotty, or they went to a high school reunion and people really didn't talk to them. And they were so excited to be back, but people made assumptions about them that were not true because we did things that not a lot of Americans did, but supposedly black Americans didn't do. And so that was
so anything specifically other than living in Saudi Arabia?
Maybe the travel, I can say, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was from South Carolina, and we talked about him some and his father before, Melvin, on your show, previous episode. But my grandfather was from Seneca, South Carolina, and he loved old country gospel, and he would drive through when he would ride around. You couldn't tell the difference, right? Because the white countryish music sounded like a lot of the black countryish music. And around the end of his life, he died in 2011. He would just put on, it was, what was his name? Oral Roberts. One of those dudes had a station, and it was basically old white people sitting on stage in chairs, singing gospel. And my grandfather loved it. And he goes, that white woman can sing. Oh, she can sing. But yeah, I think I was raised knowing that my mother told us this when we went to college. She said, you are capable of anything, and you belong anywhere that you want to be, but there are going to be people who don't think you are. And that's going to be your thing, is to figure out what that looks like. Like, not everyone's going to welcome you with open arms, whatever that looks like, but you have the right to be wherever you want to be. And that was our guiding thing, especially I remember about to go to college in 89, that's what we were told. And I just sort of rolled with that.
What about you, Darrin?
Well, I was on here previously with Melvin. You can go back and hear that episode. It's all about swimming, and it's a whole convoluted story. But I'd say one of the things that we did that's atypical of probably any family in America is my dad made us take a water competency test. So, and I'm going to make my son take it. He'll take it this summer, where you have to tread for a couple of minutes. You have to be able to swim a certain length, and you have to just be able to swim with your clothes on. So that was a big thing my father made us did. And, of course, we didn't joke where he could hear us, but that was the Evans water competency test. So that's probably an atypical thing that we did that probably not many families, period, make their kids do. I don't know. So that's my story.
Could you told the story before. Could you repeat the story about your swim class in college that you were required to take unless you could pass the test?
Oh,
and the New Yorkers' response to it.
Yeah, well, in North Carolina, I think until 2015 or 14, you had to pass a swim test to graduate college. So they take you in a pool, and if you didn't pass the swim test, you didn't graduate from college. So it was weird for me because like Melvin, I had two black parents. I grew up around black people in the country, and every black person I knew could swim. So, when people say black people don't swim, I'm like, well, I'm black. I can swim. And everybody I know can. So, in fact, black people do swim. So, I swim. People look at me like I'm an alien. I pass the test. A guy from New York says, well, Darrin, how come most black people can't swim? I was like, and of course, this is the most racist thing I think that's ever been said to me. I've been called all kinds of slurs, but I was like, I don't know all of them. They don't call me. The black people I know can swim. My cousins from Philly can swim. My cousins from Buffalo can swim. I can swim. My mom, my dad. So I'm just going all off. Classic overreaction. But it let me know that, and I told Melvin this in the episode, for a lot of Americans, black people exist as an abstraction, right? They don't really know any of us, and people are not statistics, right? They're people. I've never met a typical black person before. I have no idea what that means. I've met lots of black people. You got 3 black people on this panel. Lynne, I think are you from Maryland? Lynne, is that where you grew up? Yeah,
I am. Yeah, I'm from Baltimore originally.
She's from Baltimore. Melvin, as you know, is a quintessential Texan. When I think of Texan, I think of Melvin Edwards, right? Most Americans would not, right? I think of Texan, that's Melvin. I mean, for some reason, and don't shatter my ego here, Melvin, I think you are a master griller. So I think you can throw down with some brisket. If you can't, don't say anything.
Okay, I won't say anything. I don't want to ruin your...
Don't ruin my perception. So that's kind of my story. I think we just... And the album made me think of this. We kind of... Again, we think of black people in this country as sort of an abstraction or an other, I think, a lot of times. And that's something I think we're getting away from. And I think that's part of the backlash we've been seeing overall, is that we're getting away from that mindset.
Absolutely.
Okay, so on the topic of things that your family did that others might not consider black enough or black at all, uh, for me it was almost everything. As I mentioned, feeling like I grew up in a redneck family. My dad and I fished all the time. We loved not NASCAR racing, but what was called open wheel racing, Indy type racing. We watched the Indianapolis 500 every Memorial Day weekend. And AJ Foyt back in the 70s was considered the best driver, and he was from Houston, so we knew basically where he lived. So we felt like we had some kind of connection. But for me personally, I think it was probably music. Because and as Lynn, you said, there were lots of different genres of music on the radio back in the 70s and 80s. But especially in the 80s, I definitely gravitated more towards rock music. And I don't really know why. I just enjoyed it. And so people were always surprised. I'm thinking, okay, well, it's not that different. Like Chuck Berry and Little Richard and those guys invented rock music. So like in the late 80s when we had like Living Color come out, not the TV show, but the band being a hard metal band, and people thinking, black people can do rock music? Yeah, just like this, just like the Beyoncé album, the country album. Yeah. This is foundational. This is just a returning or a reclaiming of certain roots. So it's not alien, it's not foreign. We're not the foreigners. we're the founders, not the foreigners. So again, what people may have labeled, I didn't put a label on. I just knew what I liked, and I enjoyed what I liked, and I didn't care what people thought about it. I honestly didn't care. If you didn't like it, then that's fine. You like what you like. I like what I like. Okay, so along those lines, what goes through your minds, or sometimes out of your mouth, when you hear white Southerners claim that country music is a white genre, or is only a white genre?
Well, I tell them, I just always ask with the question, where did the banjo come from? And then I give them a little history lesson on, the banjo and how that got there. And I talk about so I try to answer that almost obliquely and say, most of pop culture, your slang comes from black people, right? I mean, the slang you use, the sort of just our general way of speaking, what's considered hip or cool in America comes from almost exclusively from black people. And I just tell them that almost everything we do in America was influenced, particularly on the music side, by those spirituals, by that singing. Rock is just blues that sped up a little bit. Country's an offshoot of those gospel songs from the South. So that's kind of what I do. I get sort of pedantic and boring when they do that. And I give them all kinds of books to read. So I'm fun at parties. So
he's that guy. There's a difference between him. He's him, and he's that guy.
That guy.
True. That's
so
true.
All right, what about you, Ray?
Oh, you said what about me? It makes me angry and it makes my blood boil. And do you remember the movie Clue, where Madeline Kahn says, "Flames"? I hated them so much. Flames on the left side of my face. And that's how I feel. It's flames on the left side of my face. Again, you were talking about the origins, even of rock. The reason that many parents didn't want their kids listening to rock music in the 50s is because they thought it had jungle beats. And so from the beginning, they realized from the haters of it that there was an urban black connection that they didn't want. And then some of the edges kind of got rounded off of those things, but there was the early recognition that there was a relationship to black music and things that sounded black, whatever that meant to people. And again, just this whole Beyonce conversation, the fact that the Black Rodeo was a thing. It's a thing. I remember years ago with a friend, I was talking about my family from Arkansas, my dad's family being farmers. And I had a friend who, out of the goodness of her heart, but she was like, "I've never seen a black farmer." like we made it up, and it was like, no, but it's become,
Well, the Department of
it's
Agriculture
literally
apparently has never seen a black farmer either,
Yeah.
but that's a different
Well,
political
that's
Exactly.
a different story.
again, but it's literal ignorance, not in a oh, that's so ignorant, but literal not knowing, because we aren't told these things. And like we said, history is told by the winners often, and by, like you said, the gatekeepers. But it makes me very angry that, angry, that's the word. Angry.
So my second question was going to be about rock music, and you touched on that a lot, Lynn. So the first question was, what do you think when you hear white Southerners claim that country is a white genre? And the second part of my question is, what do you think when you hear white Northerners claim that rock music is a white genre?
Well, I got
So you sort of go ahead, Darren.
I'm sorry. A guy at work sent me this clip of Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, and he's talking to Pharrell. They have like a drumming thing, and he said basically, yeah, I get all of those beats on Nevermind, the Nirvana record. He said it's all disco.
Yeah.
He said, oh, that's disco. And he kind of demonstrates how he got everything he got from Tony Thompson, Cameo, the Gap Band.
Oh yeah.
And he talks about it. And the guy at work was like, that's just crazy, isn't it? And I was like, no, it's obvious. I said, I'm probably the only weirdo who listens to both the Gap Band and Nirvana, but you can hear it. I mean, you can literally hear it. And I asked him, where do you think your music comes from? I'm like, where do you think rock comes from? How did that happen? And then, of course, I get on my little soapbox of pedantic again. So you definitely want me at your parties, people.
He's that guy on that topic too.
I'm like, dude, where do you think this comes from? So I don't know if it's anger. It's just sort of, I guess, maybe incredulous. I'm like, how can you not see what's so patently obvious, right? Like, I'm like, am I the crazy one here? Because you can clearly hear that influence where it came from. I mean, it's so obvious that it's like, how did you even miss it?
We saw, my sister and I and some friends went to see Duran Duran last year, 2023, who I've been in love with since the 80s, seen several times. But now Rogers and Chic open for them, and open as if she can open for anybody. And I had friends who were like, I like this concert better than the other one. Like, it could have been its own thing. And their Tiny Desk concert, Chic's Tiny Desk concert came out a couple weeks after that. But all that to say, when Nile Rodgers talks about all of the music, half of the concert is songs he wrote for other people that you didn't recognize. That's, the whole David Bowie and the whole Let's Dance, all of that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of Madonna, and then again, a lot of the disco, Sister Sledge. And but the fact that, again, all of these things are connected, and we don't see them and we don't know. But I was in the post office once here in Annapolis, and I heard the folks in the back who were sorting the mail, and someone had on the beginning of Let's Dance, and came on, and I heard what sounded like black voices to me go, oh yeah, because everybody knew that song. It appealed to everybody, but especially black folk were like, let's go with that. But that's a whole, again, soapbox. But again, like you said, the very fact that all of these things, people are trying to deny our contributions to the country, period, trying to put us in boxes, trying to maybe acknowledge things that happened to us, but decide that they're no big deal, or that we were happy slaves and we were fine. There's this relegation of us, like you said, to be an other. And sometimes we let ourselves be relegated to that because some of that has the royal we, right, has been accepted. So when people try to reclaim that, like you said, it's sometimes black folks going, we don't do that. we don't, and I joke about camping. I'm not a camper, and we don't do that. I had a friend who was like, let's all go to Harper's Ferry, let's all go camp. And so my Black friends were like, we're not doing that. But again, that's just it. It's such a stereotype that came out of some kind of truth. Like my sister and I say, we're roughing it when we don't make reservations. That's roughing.
That's really funny. You mentioned specifically the Let's Dance song by David Bowie. I think about when I hear that song, that's a song that sort of introduced to mainstream popular music the guitar playing of Stevie Ray Vaughan, who was a Texan. And you could easily look up online and Stevie Ray Vaughan talking about his influences. And one of my cousins, Lightning Hopkins, he says was one of his influences. Who Lightning Hopkins essentially started Texas blues, what became Texas blues. And then when Stevie Ray Vaughan became popular in the 80s, white people think, white people invented the blues. No, you didn't. Just like country music and rock music, it sort of evolved, and you decided you liked it, and then you sort of claimed it. And it was not, you didn't invent it. That's not quite the same.
There's some historical precedent for them doing that.
Yeah. I was thinking that too, but I'm not going to go there. I got one more. What goes through your mind question? So what goes through your mind when you hear people say their favorite country artist is an Australian named Keith Urban? But a Texan like Beyonce needs to stay in her lane.
There was, and the Queen of Country from the late '90s was a Canadian.
Yeah. Shania Twain.
Shania Twain, a Canadian. And hey, God love him, but hey, I like Canada. But again, it's just. I do.
Hold on. I'll accept no Canada slander here. I didn't expect.
No, I love Canada. I wasn't kidding.
I'm joking with you.
No, I love Canada. But I'm telling you, it's again the whole idea of who gets to belong and who doesn't. And people have said this, I'm not originating this idea, but again, what's happening with Beyonce, and then what happened back in 2016 when she sang with the Chicks at the Country Music Awards, and supposedly when she was not received warmly, and of course they weren't received warmly, but she was not received warmly. That kind of started in her head the genesis of this album, of this Cowboy Carter album. And it's like, she's like, oh, you don't like me? Bet. Let's go. But all that to say is that this whole idea of where we belong and where we don't, and the fact that for some people, country music, the way it stands now, is the safe space where they won't see Black people. It's like they think that it's quote theirs unquote, and if there are Black people in that space, they feel allowed into that space. A Darius Rucker, a Mickey Guyton, that's what I got.
Yeah, and I just think it made me kind of. All right, and I'm going to shout out you, Melvin Edwards, in your first book, The Eyes of Texans. I read that book, and it took me off on a sort of a tangent in my mind. Just driving down, I do a lot of driving across the state for work, and it's 8 hours from one end of North Carolina to the others. I have hours long trips, and I was thinking, well, what is a Texan, right? What does that mean? Who gets to decide who is a Texan and who is not a Texan? And I was just thinking about, I was reading about Melvin's family and the history. And I was like, man, that dude's a Texan. And I remember the first time I heard him speak, I was like, you really are from Texas. He said, I took classes to get rid of my accent. I said, it's still there. I was in a little bit. I was in the Army, and I always tried to kind of cultivate this sort of, this sort of trick about American accents. So I can hear just a little bit of that Texan in his voice. So the album made me think of that again, or flash back to that of, well, who gets to decide what that means? Why do we
That's right.
accept those type things when, and again, to me, it gets to the point where there's some things I can see about America or about us that are patently obvious. I'm like, why can't the rest of y'all see that? And then I'm thinking, I'm the weird one, I guess. So that's what it made me think. Who gets to decide that? Why do you get to decide what country music is? Right? Who made you in charge of what country music is? But Keith Urban can be country music. Shania Twain, and again, I did an exchange in Canada, Lynn, so I accept no Canadian slander. I love those people, except for the winter. But, just it made me think about our society and who gets to decide stuff. And
Yeah.
why do we sort of accept that? Why can't the image of an American Texan be Melvin Edwards?
Right.
Right? What's wrong with that? He's, I guess, Sons of Texas, right? He's got the genealogy. So, again, I guess that took us off into a little bit of a tangent there, but
that's okay.
No,
that's part of the story.
No, I'll say this, my husband is from San Antonio, and he's a black dude who used to have dreads, and now he has short twists, but it's from San Antonio. That's part of his heritage, so now that's part of my son's heritage. Even though we haven't been there in a while, he can still claim that as being his roots.
Yeah.
Like yesterday I went to, unfortunately, a funeral of my cousin, who in my first book, I talked about my city cousins and my country cousins. And she was part of the group that were the country cousins. My Uncle Jack, who's my mom's brother, older brother, he was a real cowboy. Like he was a bull rider. He was a singer. And I always thought he was the coolest man. And he barbecued. I learned some barbecue techniques.
Nice.
But his youngest daughter passed away last week, and they had her funeral yesterday. And having that book sort of helped me reclaim some of my own roots and remember some of my own roots. And then being there at the funeral yesterday, seeing some, like, I wasn't the only one there who wore a cowboy hat. Like, I didn't, obviously we took off the hat in church, but I wasn't the only one wearing a cowboy hat, and it felt normal. It felt good. It felt like, these are my people here. Like, we're not trying to imitate anybody. We're not trying to impress anybody. We're just being ourselves. And that was the best part about it.
No, just a funny story. So my father's family was from a town in Arkansas called Crossett, which is not far from the Louisiana border. And I remember back in the 90s going down to Crossett, and my grandfather's brother took us to this restaurant called the Catfish Inn, and we said the only non-fried thing was the broiled catfish, but it was, my sister says, doing backflips in butter. Yeah. I mean, so there was nothing healthy. But what was funny though is that, it's a kind of restaurant, little down home restaurant, where it had like newspaper articles on the wall of like people from around, that it also had pictures of like baseball teams and whatever, blah, blah, blah. So there was an article about someone whose last name was Streeter, which is my maiden name, which is my dad's family. And my uncle said, well, those are the white Streeters. They're not any kin to us. And I was like, for real, they are. It's very likely. But again, but there were black folks and white folks who went to the Catfish Inn. Everybody was at the Catfish Inn because they knew what was good. And so there's so many places where of course there are many more cultures than black culture and white culture, whatever even those mean. But there's so many spaces where we are alike and like the same things. And how, like you said, who gets to claim what? Who gets to claim it all belonging to all of us? Or who is it, you're visiting this, or this isn't yours?
Yeah, and we never think about, who, just why do we accept that? Why is it the default that these people at the CMT get to say, well, Beyonce doesn't belong up there. Who
Yeah.
who put them in charge? And I think that's, getting back to her, I think she's, and I was telling Melvin this, one of the things I think people react to is she's an ambitious artist, right? Love her or
Yes.
hate her, she's trying to push something or push envelopes. And I think that's something that sort of scares people a little bit too. We have our own sort of bubbles of music. I try to have a big bubble. Some people have little smaller bubbles. So I think that's probably a part of it as well. Like you said, it's ownership. We own this. This is our thing. And it's kind of that high school mentality, I guess.
Yeah.
So do you guys think this is a legacy defining project for Beyonce or just a passing fad?
Completely legacy defining as far as I'm concerned. It was really interesting. I was talking to someone yesterday who said what the funny thing is that 20 years ago, the beat on Beyonce is that she was country, not in terms of like country music, but oh, that's so country, right? Is because of the way she talked. There's an issue of, I want to say like Texas Monthly or something like that from 20 years ago with her on the front wearing a Willie Nelson shirt
yes.
with him and his braids, and she's wearing braids. So this was not something that just came, which it's not just a fad. It's not her. I've heard people say she's just trying to take out of Taylor Swift's, budget. Like Beyonce does not need to steal from Taylor Swift, right? But you know what I'm saying? And they get pitted against each other. But I think it is genre. I think this is going to be a legacy defining album for her. And also she's a young woman. She's in her 40s, right? Mm-hmm. So who knows what else she has up her sleeve? I mean, so this is two. This is the second, I guess, of like what's going to be a trilogy. So who knows what the next genre is going to be, but it all sounds very organic to me. None of it sounds gimmicky. I know a lot of people didn't like Texas Hold'em. I love it. But they said it sounds gimmicky and like she just sort of threw whatever country was supposed to be in the blender. But to me, coming out of her mouth, it all sounds so authentic. And I think that's what's getting people from, and some people just aren't going to like it just because they're not going to like it, and God bless you. That's fine. You don't have to. And I think people who like it, who've given it a chance and like it, and after that like it, are touched by its authenticity, whatever that means for people.
And I think it's going to be legacy defining in the sense that, like I said, she's an artist. I think she likes to push envelopes. The trilogy, Lynn, I'll bet you, I'm not a betting man, it's going to be a rock album. It's going to be a rock album. But I think she's trying to sort of reclaim that music. And I love Texas Hold'em. I hear people say it's gimmicky. I'm like, My Rosalita by Brooks and Dunn's not gimmicky. Music is not catchy and gimmicky. Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana is not gimmicky.
But honky tonk, but donkey dong.
That's not a gimmick.
All right, you break your heart.
Yeah, I'm like, are y'all serious? I'm like, that's a compliment, not a criticism, right? You want music to be catchy and get you. And Texas Hold'em is one of my favorites on the album, but I think it's going to be legacy building in the sense that when we look back on her, I think she has this ambition to be sort of that genre, sort of genre fluid artist. And that's obviously what she's trying
Prince.
What she's trying to do.
Prince.
So I think it'll be legacy building in that sense. Will she do another country album? I don't know. Or maybe. The first time I heard her talk, I was like, this was a long time ago during Destiny's Child. I'm like, man, she's from Houston, right? It was like, I guess me with
like hearing Patrick, like listening to Patrick Mahomes talk. He's from the Houston area.
Oh yeah, Kermit from Houston is what I call him sometimes. So I think it'll be legacy defining.
Okay. So for me, listening to Cowboy Carter, the thing that struck me was the influences and the direct remakes from acts like, obviously, Dolly Parton. I heard some Tina Turner screams. She directly remade a Beatles song, Blackbird. There was some Chuck Berry, some Beach Boys, Sister Rosetta Thorpe, and even Nancy Sinatra, which probably surprised me the most. These boots were made for walking.
Yeah.
So I think this is as much a continuation of many legacies as it is a legacy for herself. So this is, in my mind, bigger than just Beyonce.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that I really like her. I like her Jolene cover. It's that Jolene must have been some kind of woman. Is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, Jolene didn't get off so easy as Dolly let her go.
Yeah,
Dolly said please, and Dolly and Beyonce said child please.
yeah.
She said back up off.
Okay, so before we go, I'd like to do a quick lightning round. So I'm going to say these terms without any context, and you tell me most people consider them to be a black thing or a white thing.
Okay.
Urban,
Black,
rural,
white, which is funny for me because
that's so hard to answer, but most people would say white.
yeah,
Yes.
country.
White. That's how this is people's perception. So that's who we think of. We shouldn't. And again, part of it is just white is the default in America. If I go to 10 people in my neighborhood and say, which one of these people is a Texan? I show them your picture without a cowboy hat, another picture of a guy from Boston with a cowboy hat. They're going to pick the white guy from Boston, right? Even though, this guy's practically every Edwards that's ever lived is from Texas or lived in Texas.
That's true.
And when I hear country without saying music, when I hear country, I think black because I think of my black country, my black Southern family. If you take the music off of it, that's what I think of.
And you talked about, you said Beyonce sounded country to you when you first heard her talk.
Right. And it was somebody else who said that. But yeah, she did. She sounded like a young Southern woman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next term is suburban.
White. Yeah, that's perceived as white in America.
With a minivan.
Yeah.
Okay, I got two more. Blue collar.
Oh, that's code for white. I hate when the news does this, or the newspapers. We're going to interview blue collar workers. I wish everybody would just say white when that's what they mean. Right? Say working class white voters. There are black blue collar voters. It's just and again, it gets back to that default thing, but that's become, and I'm sorry, Lynn, to step on you. That's just code. And it drives me absolutely nuts.
No, it is. And when people say, yeah, it is. I mean, I'm from Baltimore, so Bethlehem Steel, and there was a big deal, but black and white people worked in factories. And like you said, that's what it means. When you say urban, you mean black people. And when you say blue collar, salt of the earth, the real America, white, and also white.
Yeah, I just say it. Okay. I mean, sometimes I'm on Twitter, someone say, just say what you mean. Why the code words? If that's what you mean, say it with your chest. I mean, I'm talking to white people, right? Okay. I mean, that's fine. You can, nobody really, I'm not going to begrudge that from you. In fact, I'd rather know that up front, right? Somebody wrote about North Carolinians. He was going off on all the transplants here in the Raleigh area. And like, North Carolinas are pig-eating, beach tanning people. I'm like, well, I'm a North Carolinian. I've never tanned on a beach in my life, right? So, what is that? Just say white.
Okay, so that was blue collar. So what about white collar?
I think white collar also means white. I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lynn.
No, I think of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. That's what I think of when I think of that character of Christian Bale in that movie. That's what I think of when I think of White Collar. That's wild. That's what I think of.
That's a sort of strange association. Well, I can, I've never seen that movie. The book is really, really good. The book is just a satire of white collar people. But
right.
I'm gonna have to check out the movie now.
Yeah, I've never seen it all the way through, but it's just such a phenomenon because I don't like a lot of blood. But yeah.
Yeah,
all right, so go ahead, Darrin. You're going to say something.
I said they probably amped up the blood. The book is really more is a character study and a satire of that sort of materialistic white collar worker. And I'm sure that really doesn't translate to a movie. You can't do that. So they probably had to have more blood. That's why they have all the blood.
Use the blood as a filler.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the last question I've got today. So today's guests for my podcast have been my friends Lynne Childress and Darrin Evans. Thank you to both of you for appearing today. This has been a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And nice to meet you, Lynne.
It's so nice to meet you, Darrin.
So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go. That was Stories from Real Life with your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. See you then.